In this video, I'm gonna rank every character in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe from worst to best, but I'm not ranking them one at a time. Let me explain so you're not confused throughout the video. There are 53 characters in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and each character is divided into one of the 18 character classes. If more than one character is in the same class, those characters share the same stats. We're gonna assign every character class a tier, starting from should retire and working our way up to meta. I'm bringing this all up because it's gonna make the order of characters within the tiers a lot less confusing. As in, the characters within the same class will not be ordered within the tier. However, if there are multiple character classes in the same tier, the classes will be ordered. If it still doesn't make sense, you'll get it as the video goes on. With that said, without further ado, let's start giving her, bud. Starting off the show, we got should retire. These are the worst characters in the game who have no business being used online. Also, for each character class, I'm going to use either Teddy Buggy or Mr. Scooty, and that indicates which frame is more worthwhile using online, although you'll likely find similar success no matter which frame you use out of the two. Anyways, the worst characters in the game are Baby Peach and Baby Daisy. They have a speed stat of 1 and a mini turbo stat of 5. Now sure, their mini turbo stat is the best in the game, but they have next to no speed to show for it. Best mini turbo, worst speed. As much as mini turbo is the most important stat, speed is the runner-up, so you cannot neglect speed, which is exactly what you'd be doing if you use these characters. As a result, Baby Peach and Baby Daisy are at the bottom of should retire, the worst characters in the game. Following them, at the top of should retire, we have Baby Rosalina and Lemmy. Just like Baby Peach and Baby Daisy, these two have a speed stat of 1 and a mini turbo stat of 5. I'm ranking them ahead of Baby Peach and Baby Daisy because even though they're down 1 in handling and down 2 in traction, they're up 1 in acceleration. And in my opinion, acceleration is a more important stat than the combination of handling and traction. With that said, this character class is ranked at the top of should retire. I mean, regardless of which class you think is better, these two classes are basically equally as terrible. So if you want to win, don't use any of these characters. Next up, we got the bad tier. Not quite should retire, but you're still putting yourself at a substantial disadvantage using one of these characters. At the bottom of bad, we got Koopa, Lakitu, and Bowser Jr. This character class has a speed stat of 3 and a mini turbo stat of 4. It's also worth mentioning that this is the first of 6 character classes with a mini turbo stat of 4. However, not all of these character classes have the same speed stat. In fact, this class has the lowest speed stat of the 6. As much as you may have a very good mini turbo stat, you don't have nearly enough speed to show for it. With that said, these characters are ranked at the bottom of bad. Following them, in the middle of bad, we have Toadette, Wendy, and Isabelle. Just like the Koopa class, this character class has a speed stat of 3 and a mini turbo stat of 4. While the Koopa class is up 1 in handling and 3 in traction, the Toadette class is up 1 in acceleration, and I think that's more important. And yes, I also recognize there's a difference in invincibility, but honestly, I think this stat is as unimportant as it gets. If you're trying to win, your combo is not going to have much invincibility at all. In other words, I think this is by far the least important stat in the game, so I'm just not going to talk about it. Sorry, not sorry. Regardless, the difference in viability between these two character classes is very minuscule, as in their placements are basically interchangeable. But for the sake of the tier list, the Toadette class belongs in the middle of bad. And finally, at the top of bad, we have Baby Mario, Baby Luigi, Dry Bones, and Light Me. These characters have a speed stat of 2 and a mini turbo stat of 5. Keeping things simple, they may be down 1 in speed compared to the other characters in this tier, but they are up 1 in mini turbo, and that's the more important stat. Long story short, these characters belong at the top of bad. Once again, if you're trying to win online, I wouldn't go as far as to use any of these characters. Next up, we got mid. These are characters that you could find some value out of online, but for the most part, they were a lot better before the Wave 4 bounce patch. At the bottom of mid, we only have one character, Petey Piranha. Petey has a speed stat of 8 and a mini turbo stat of 1. It's also worth mentioning he has a weight stat of 10, which is pretty good. He may be fast, but he is heavily lacking in mini turbo, and that's no good. Also, his head is huge and can get in the way. Not even joking. So yeah, this character belongs at the bottom of mid. Following Petey, we got the metal characters, Metal Mario, Gold Mario, and Pink Gold Peach. The metals have a speed stat of 8 and a mini turbo stat of 1. In fact, they actually have the exact same stats as Petey Piranha. And yes, I do think invincibility is that irrelevant. Anyways, what sets the metals apart from Petey is that the metals have a medium frame, whereas Petey has a large frame. Long story short, the metals have a smaller hitbox. And also, none of them have a massive head that covers way too much of the screen. So they're ranked just ahead of Petey, but still in the bottom half of mid. Starting off the top half of mid, we got Bowser, Morton, and Heavy Me. These guys have a speed stat of 10 and a mini turbo stat of 0. Essentially, in terms of stats, these characters are the opposite of the characters in should retire. But the main reason reason why these characters and every other heavyweight are all in mid or higher is because the best combos in the game include frames and wheels with low speed and high mini turbo. The fastest characters in the game, including these guys, balance this out very nicely, and it's why they were some of the best characters in the game prior to the Wave 4 balance patch. However, we're in 2024 now, and in 2024, these characters are mid. Finally, at the top of mid tier, we have Wario, Dry Bowser, and Funky Kong. Like the Bowser class, they have a speed stat of 10 and a mini turbo stat of 0. However, the Bowser class is up 1 in weight, whereas the Wario class is up 1 in both handling and traction. And I think the combination of handling and traction is more important than weight. You could make arguments for the Bowser class being better than the Wario class, but honestly, who cares? Because the difference is very minuscule. But for the sake of the tier list, these characters are at the top of mid tier. As the name implies, these characters aren't necessarily bad, but they aren't exactly good either. They were a lot better before Wave 4 released. Next up is the decent tier. These characters certainly have potential, but they're just below the top tiers of characters that you'll find the most value out of online. At the bottom of decent, we have Toad, Shy Guy, and Larry. This class has both a speed and mini turbo stat of 4. These characters do have potential, as they're in the middle of the pack of characters with a mini turbo stat of 4, but they're still lacking in speed just a little bit. I do think you could use any of these characters online and find success, but you're still putting yourself at a disadvantage. Not a huge one, but a disadvantage nonetheless. For these reasons, these characters belong at the bottom of decent. Following them at essentially the top of decent, we have the old meta characters, Waluigi, DK, and Roy. For old time's sake, I'm using the Wild Wiggler for these characters, but for online play in 2024, I'd suggest using Mr. Scooty. Anyways, these characters have a speed stat of 9 and a mini turbo stat of 1. Combine any of these characters with a low speed, high mini turbo vehicle combination, and you have a very optimal combo. If you're living in 2022. If you're living in 2024 like the rest of us, these characters definitely aren't bad, but they're not what they used to be. As a result, they're basically at the top of decent tier. And that's because the top of decent belongs to one character, Wiggler. Wiggler looks funny, which is why I used it. But if we're talking online play, if you're using Wiggler, I'd put him on Mr. Scooty. Wiggler has a speed stat of 9 and a mini turbo stat of 1. In fact, he has the exact same stats as the Waluigi class. However, unlike the Waluigi class, Wiggler has a medium frame instead of large. As a result, Wiggler has a smaller hitbox, and if the meta hadn't changed, Wiggler would have been the best combo in the game, which is kind of crazy. But in reality, Wiggler belongs at the top of decent on his own. In terms of online viability, these characters all have potential, but they're just below the characters who you'll find the most value in using. Next up, we got the good tier. These characters may not be meta, but if you put any of them on either Teddy Buggy or Mr. Scooty, you'll be set up nicely to perform well online. At the bottom of good, we got Rosalina, King Boo, Link, and Pauline. These characters have a speed stat of 8 and a mini turbo stat of 2. They may have a lot of speed compared to mini turbo, but they have just enough mini turbo to warrant them being good choices for online play. These characters may be the fastest out of all the viable characters in the game, but because they lack the most in mini turbo, they belong at the bottom of good tier. Following them in the middle of good tier, we got Mario, Ludwig, and Medium Me. These characters have a speed stat of 7 and a mini turbo stat of 3. And now we're really dialing in closer to the best mix of speed and mini turbo. If you use any of these characters, you may not quite have a mini turbo stat of 4 or 5, but the speed stat of 7 most certainly helps your case in using any of these characters, especially if you're using Mr. Scooty, as you can then easily perform all the techniques that you could possibly need for online play. So with all that said, these characters are in the middle of good. Finally, at the top of good tier, we got Luigi, Iggy, and Kamek. Like the Mario class, these characters have a speed stat of 7 and a mini turbo stat of 3. However, in comparison, the Luigi class is up 1 in handling, whereas the Mario class is up 1 in traction. This is without a doubt the most minuscule comparison in this video. I mean, these two stats are basically equally as important, so the Luigi class being ranked higher than the Mario class doesn't really mean anything. But regardless, for the sake of the tier list, the Luigi class is at the top of good tier. Use any of the characters in good tier with either Teddy Buggy or Mr. Scooty, and you'll most certainly find success online. Next up, we got borderline meta. As the name implies, these characters are as close as you can get to the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe meta without being in the meta. This tier only belongs to one character class, and this character class includes Cat Peach, Inkling Girl, Villager Girl, and Diddy Kong. These characters have a speed stat of 5 and a mini turbo stat of 4. You most certainly can use any of these characters, and you'll only be at the slightest of disadvantages. This character class is just below the top of the 6 classes with a mini turbo stat of 4. If these characters had just a tiny bit more speed, they would be in the meta tier, but because they're just shy of the speed criteria for meta, these are the only characters in and borderline meta. They're almost there, but even though they aren't there, that definitely doesn't mean they're useless online. Finally, we got the meta, the best characters in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. This tier belongs to 2 character classes. At the bottom of meta, we got Tanuki Mario, Inkling Boy, and Villager Boy. These characters have a speed stat of 6 and a mini turbo stat of 4. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the best mix of speed and mini turbo. These characters are basically at the peak of the character classes with a mini turbo stat of 4, and they most certainly got a very nice buff from the balance patches in waves 4 and 5. As a result, if you use any of these characters online, you're basically giving yourself the best chance at success. They're technically not the very best, but the difference between this character class and the top of the meta isn't that noticeable. So with that said, these characters are at the bottom of the meta. Yes, I know, that sounds ironic. And last but certainly not least, we got the top of the meta, also known as the very best characters in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. These characters are Yoshi, Birdo, Peach, Daisy, and Peachette. Like the Tanuki Mario class, these characters have a speed stat of 6 and a mini turbo stat of 4. Comparing the classes, the Tanuki Mario class is up 1 in weight, whereas the Yoshi class is up 2 in traction. I personally think traction is a little bit more important than weight, but of course, those stats aren't as important, so it's no big deal. Regardless, these characters are the most dominant out of every character with a mini turbo stat of 4. And that's why you basically see every top player using one of these characters online, namely either Yoshi or Birdo. These characters are simply the best, not only in online play, but also on most tracks and time trials. In the last year and a bit, the Yoshi class has completely taken over this game. And that's why these characters most certainly belong at the top of the meta, the very best characters in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. And just like that, there you have it. These are my character rankings in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe from worst to best. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I'd really appreciate if you leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with any part of this tier list. There are certainly a lot of components of this list that come down to a tiny bit of subjectivity, especially in the lower tiers, so I'm curious to see what you guys think. And if your favorite character isn't Yoshi or Birdo, then now you know just how good your favorite character is in this game. With that said, until next time, thank you all so much for watching. Have yourselves a fantastic day, and keep on giving her, bud.